You know that uncomfortable feeling of being alone in a strange place, yet swearing someone is watching you? Maybe it's the creak of a door, a snap on the floor, or a silence that lasts just a little too long. We laugh it off, make excuses, say it's the house settling or that the dog barked at nothing. But what if it's not? What if the presence you feel isn't just in your head? What if someone, somewhere, is actually watching your every step, every gesture, every night you think you're safe? Today, you're going to hear accounts that go beyond fleeting scares. These are stories that dive into what we fear most, the invasion of our privacy, whether through hidden cameras, doors that should never open, or roommates who keep far too many secrets. And before we descend into this abyss, let me ask you, have you ever experienced something strange that you still can't explain? If so, send us your story. Who knows? Yours could be the next one featured here. Because one thing you learn, listening to cases like these, is that the line between paranoia and reality is much thinner than it seems. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more stories like this. I was 22 when I accepted a temporary job while on vacation that, at first glance, seemed ridiculously easy, staying at a guy's house I barely knew to take care of his dog. His name was Craig. He called me with a calm, almost overly friendly voice, saying he would be traveling for a week and needed someone to look after his golden retriever, Max. The job was simple: sleep there, keep the dog company, and make sure he didn't get anxious. The pay, above average, it seemed perfect. I met Craig 2 days later. He was almost 40, tall, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and a sweater that always looked freshly laundered. Friendly, maybe too friendly. The kind of person who smiles just a little too much, who talks looking too deeply into your eyes. I should have noticed these details, but at the time I just thought, better an overly polite person than a rude one. His house was secluded on the edge of town in a wooded area. Charming, but old. Beige carpets, floral curtains, heavy furniture. It was like stepping into a 90s catalog that had never been updated. Craig showed me everything calmly, where the spare key was, what I could eat from the fridge, how the garage gate worked. Then he said something that now sounds much more sinister. You can sleep in the guest room. It's right next to the living room. It's the most comfortable spot in the house. At the time, I just thanked him. I had no idea that sentence would echo in my mind later. The first 2 nights were peaceful. I watched TV in the living room, walked Max, then slept in the guest room with him curled up at my feet. Everything seemed normal. But on the 3rd night, I realized nothing in that house was truly as it seemed. I was sitting on the bed, scrolling on my phone, when my eyes caught a detail: the digital alarm clock on the nightstand. Unlike the rest of the outdated decor, it was too modern. Black, with a blue LED display. It didn't match anything. I approached and saw a small hole above the numbers, a round hole, perfectly drilled, pointing straight at the bed. My heart raced. I had read about hidden cameras and alarm clocks, but never seen one up close. I picked it up. It was heavy, too heavy, and inside, there was a low hum, like a tiny fan running. At that exact moment, Max lifted his head and started whining, staring fixedly at the door. Seconds later, I heard something that froze my entire body, the sound of a door closing somewhere in the house, and Craig wasn't supposed to be back until Sunday. But it was Wednesday. My stomach twisted. I held the clock like it was a weapon, even knowing it was just a piece of plastic. The noise continued, slow, heavy footsteps crushing the carpet in the hallway. With trembling hands, I put the alarm clock back and ran to the door, locking it just as the footsteps stopped outside. "Open the door." Craig's voice came through the wood, calm, almost sweet, but with a labored tone. I just forgot something from the last time I was here. I froze. My whole body wanted to throw up and run at the same time. "It's not what you think," he continued, still soft. "That's not a camera. It's just a motion sensor for the dog. I didn't mean to scare you." Silence. Just my heart pounding too hard. Then, suddenly, the calm vanished from his voice. "Open that door. Now." Max started barking, furious, jumping against the door. Craig responded with pounding, hard, repeated knocks, followed by shouts. "You don't understand. Open it, or I'll use the spare key and call the police. I'll say you broke into my house." I ran to the window, which was thankfully low enough to escape. My fingers shook so much that it took 3 tries to open the latch. Behind me, Craig yelled. Max barked as if trying to stop him from coming in. And then I made it. I opened the window, jumped clumsily, and landed on the wet grass. I ran without looking back, stumbling over gravel until I reached the road. I called my mom with a choked voice, begging her to pick me up. While I waited, I hid behind mailboxes, praying Craig wouldn't come after me. When she arrived, I got in the car and didn't look back. I never went back to that house. I never received the promised payment. The woman who recommended me vanished from my messages. And Craig, well, he never faced any consequences. But what still haunts me to this day is that detail, the sound of the door closing before I noticed the clock. If Craig was inside, watching everything in real time, that means he had been there long before I realized it. And the question that torments me to this day is, what would have happened if I had opened that door? After a long period back from vacation, I started traveling a lot for work again. Nothing glamorous, just endless meetings, boring presentations, and long days trying to appear more competent than I really was. To save money, I always used the same lodging app. Practical, cheap, and until then, never a problem. Until that night. I arrived tired, carrying a suitcase that seemed to get heavier by the minute. The host, a thin middle-aged man named Daniel, greeted me with a rehearsed friendliness, a smile that seemed practiced in the mirror, repeated so many times it no longer looked human. The house was too big for one person. 2 floors, modern, furniture, pristine white walls. Every room seemed too clean, as if no one actually lived there, except for one detail I couldn't ignore. A locked door in the basement. I asked casually, "And this door?" He laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. "Oh, nothing, just storage. Please don't worry about it." At the time, I didn't think much of it, but something about that door bothered me, maybe because he was too quick to cut the subject off. I went upstairs to the guest room, took a shower, and tried to relax. But the sound started as soon as the lights went out. A slow dragging, like heavy furniture being pushed across the concrete floor, coming from beneath me, from the basement. I curled up on the bed, heart racing. I tried to convince myself it was just plumbing, or some old freezer working. But then another sound came, a steady rhythmic knock. 3 sharp taps, like someone tapping on the wall. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, caught between going to check or staying still until dawn. I chose the latter, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, I went downstairs for breakfast. Daniel was sitting at the table, smiling as if he had been waiting for me all night. "Slept well?" he asked. I hesitated. "I think I heard some noises in the basement." His smile widened. "Oh yes, this house is old. It talks sometimes." I tried to laugh along, but the laugh died in my throat. He didn't blink, didn't look away, as if he were evaluating my reaction. During the day, I worked. Outside, but anxiety followed me like a shadow. When I returned at night, I noticed something different. The basement door, previously locked with a key, now had only a simple chain lock, barely secured. It was as if it had been locked in a hurry, or as if someone had left and didn't care to hide it. I decided I wouldn't spend another night there. I packed silently and requested a ride through the app. While waiting, I sat on the couch trying not to look at the door. But then I heard it. A voice, low, weak, almost a whisper. "Help me." My blood ran cold. I stared at the door. Silence. Then again, clearer. "Please, get me out of here." I stood, instinctively stepping toward the basement. My hand almost touched the lock when I heard another sound. Footsteps descending the stairs. Light, but fast. Daniel. I ran to the front door just as he appeared from the hallway, out of breath, eyes wide. "Leaving now?" he asked, as if it were the most absurd thing in the world. I just shook my head, unable to come up with any convincing excuse. The car arrived seconds later. I got in without looking back. The next day, I tried to report the listing on the app, but it no longer existed, as if it had been erased overnight. To this day, I don't know if the voice I heard was real. But sometimes, at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear in my memory that weak plea, "Help me." I wonder even more why I always seem to get caught up in situations this awkward. Continuing with my crazy stories, after a while, I couldn't live alone anymore. It was too expensive, and let's face it, the loneliness was starting to weigh on me. That's how I ended up agreeing to share an apartment with a college classmate. Her name was Camilla. At first, everything seemed normal. She was friendly, maybe even overly organized, the type who would tidy the living room before you even finished using it. At first, I found it almost comforting, but over time, small things started to bother me. She knew too, much about me. Not just what I told her, but details I had never mentioned. Once, she casually commented on my favorite childhood restaurant. I had never told anyone about it since leaving my hometown. Another time, she left a book on the table that I had read weeks before. Except I had left that very copy at my parents' house, miles away. "Oh, I thought you'd like it," she said, smiling. Her smiles always seemed to last just a second too long. One night, I came home later from work and noticed my bedroom door was unlocked. I always locked it, always. When I entered, nothing seemed out of place, except one detail. My pillow had been turned. I was sure I hadn't left it that way. The following night, I placed a small piece of tape on the door frame, just to check if someone entered when I wasn't there. The next day, the tape was on the floor. Camilla never mentioned anything, but that same night she said, "Are you sleeping well? You seem tired." The way she said it made me feel watched. I started avoiding being home. But every time I returned, I noticed subtle signs. My clothes folded differently. Notebooks with pages marked that I didn't remember opening. And once, on the kitchen table, I found a loose sheet with my handwriting. It had sentences I remembered writing in a diary years before. But that diary was locked away in a box at my parents' house. A chill ran down my spine. One day, I came home early from work and heard something. Voices coming from my room. I entered, silently, and saw Camilla sitting on my bed, holding one of my t-shirts, speaking softly as if to someone invisible. When she saw me, she froze. Then she smiled, embarrassed. "Sorry, I was just organizing." I wanted to confront her, but something about the way she held my t-shirt paralyzed me. That night, I slept with the door locked from the inside. But in the middle of the night, I woke to a faint sound, a click, the doorknob turning repeatedly, slow, patient, as if she knew I was awake, listening. The next day, I quit the lease and left the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't even take half of my things. 2 months later, I found a letter left in the mailbox at my new address. The envelope had no sender. Inside, just a blank sheet, except for one phrase written in capital letters, "You shouldn't have left me." I've always been the type to enjoy driving alone at night. I don't know if it was the sense of freedom, the almost empty road, or just the silence. But after what happened, just seeing headlights in the rearview mirror makes my heart race. The road to my house was almost always deserted, a long stretch of highway lined with trees. I knew every curve, every sign, every pothole. One night, I noticed a car starting to follow me. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, it was a public road. But something felt off. It didn't overtake me, nor slow down. It just followed, keeping the same distance, like a shadow. I looked in the rearview mirror more than once, trying to see who was driving, but the high beams blinded me. I thought about slowing down, letting them pass, but a feeling told me not to. With every mile, the tightness in my chest grew. After 10 minutes, I turned onto a secondary road I rarely used, just to see if it would continue. And it did. Turned behind me without hesitation. My stomach turned. The secondary road led to a small neighborhood, but before that, there was a long, unlit stretch. And it was on that stretch that I realized something even worse. The car turned off its headlights. Driving alone at night was already intimidating. But now, all I could see was the darkness of the road and a shadow behind me, silent, almost glued to my bumper. My fingers were sweating on the wheel. I accelerated. It accelerated with me. The sound of the engine behind me was like a roar, reminding me every second that I was not alone on that road. I tried to think quickly. Should I call the police? Honk? Stop? But my mind only screamed, "Keep driving." Then I had a desperate idea. I knew there was a small police station in a village about 15 minutes away. I drove as fast as I could in that direction. The car behind me didn't relent. Every curve felt tighter, every shadow more threatening. I imagined that if I stopped, someone would get out of that car and drag me into the darkness. When I finally saw the village lights, I did something I don't know where I found the courage for. I turned on the hazard lights and honked, non-stop, straight to the police station. Only then did the car behind me slow down. It didn't enter, just stopped across the street, turned off the engine, and stayed there. 2 officers came out to assist me. By the time I pointed, the car had already turned around and disappeared down the road, as if it had never been there. They asked if I had seen the plate, the driver's face, anything. I hadn't. I only remembered that suffocating feeling, those headlights blinding my eyes, and the darkness, when they turned off the lights. I returned home that night with a police escort, but even today when I drive alone, I feel the same knot in my stomach. And every headlight in the rear view reminds me that somewhere, someone could still be following me. I swear I sought help to get rid of fears, paranoia, and anxiety after receiving a message like that. And while I never had that type of disturbance again, which brought me some calm, I had to move again to move on. When I finally managed to move, after that night being followed, I thought I would find some peace. I just wanted a quiet place, a simple corner where I could breathe without feeling that someone was always behind me. I found a small apartment in an old 3-story building, one of those that creak when you climb the stairs. It was cheap, well located, and at first glance seemed perfect. But soon I noticed something strange. The apartment across from mine was always dark. I never saw a light on, never heard a TV, never music, or any sound of someone living there. Yet every time I looked through the peephole or opened the door to leave, I had the feeling that someone was already standing on the other side, watching. And that's when the worst part began. During the first few nights, I woke up around 2:52 a.m. with the distinct impression that someone was in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but when I held my breath to listen more carefully, I could hear it clearly. Slow, dragging footsteps, going from one end of the hallway to the other. And they always stopped right in front of my door. I stayed perfectly still, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to that sound of feet rubbing against the worn carpet. It was as if someone was standing there just to remind me that I wasn't alone. On the 3rd night this happened, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up slowly, barefoot, and went to the door. I pressed my ear against the cold wood and could barely control my breathing. On the other side, silence. But you could feel it. I swear you could feel a still presence, waiting. Suddenly, a sharp click, as if someone had slowly dragged a fingernail along the door. I jumped back, my heart racing. In the morning, when I finally found the courage to look, there was a long scratch running down the wood. The next day, I went to talk to the building superintendent. I asked who lived in the apartment across the hall. He looked at me as if he didn't understand the question. He said, it had been empty for years, that no one lived there. I laughed nervously and pressed him further. He swore the place was locked up, that the last person who lived there had moved out a long time ago. That night, when I left for work, something caught my attention. The door of the apartment across from mine, which always seemed locked, was slightly ajar. No more than a few centimeters, but enough to see the darkness inside. I ran up the steps without looking back, and since then, every time I open my apartment door, I feel the same chill, as if someone were standing in the darkness on the other side, in absolute silence, waiting for the moment I had the courage to look inside. I keep thinking, and I can't shake the question, how much of our security is just a thin fabric stitched together by routines? A pillow in the right place, a locked door, a drawn curtain, small barriers that make us believe we are protected. But what if those barriers are just convincing illusions, enough to deceive us until someone decides to test them? And that's what truly terrifies me, the idea that brute force isn't necessary to control you. A tiny hole in an alarm clock, a lens hidden behind detector smoke, a locked door that someone decides to unlock in the dead of night. Small acts, small choices conspiring to reduce your freedom until, little by little, you start doubting everything. The sound you heard, the shadow you saw, the person you trusted. Imagining someone else's eyes watching me, sleep, or a cold lens recording my routines, changes the way I inhabit every room. The bedroom ceases to be a refuge, the house, a safe harbor, the night itself, a time of rest. And then you start moving cautiously, checking every clock, every detector, every painting on the wall where a tiny hole could be disguised. Paranoia? Perhaps. But tell me, when was the last time you didn't check something before going to bed? And then comes the final question, the one that never shuts up. If someone wanted to watch and succeeded, how much of our private life has already been recorded, cataloged, consumed by others? And what if the next person observing us isn't a strange neighbor or a suspicious host, but something faceless, something patient, choosing its victims like fruit, waiting for the perfect moment to harvest? If there's a lesson here, maybe it's this. The line between maybe and reality can be an ajar door. Close it. Check it. Ask questions. Demand proof. And above all, trust. Your gut when something feels wrong, because intuition, as subjective as it may seem, is often the last real defense we have. And if, even after checking, locking, and reporting, you still hear a sound outside, a creak on the floor, a low laugh that drifts along the wall, don't disbelieve yourself. Maybe someone is just beginning to watch. Maybe it's your turn to write the story they don't want you to tell. Until the next story.